In the dimly lit corridors of an ancient spacecraft, a human man named Elias stumbled through his first day on the job. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, metallic and floral at once, and every step echoed unnaturally against walls that seemed to pulse faintly under their metallic sheen. He had been hired as caretaker for something he still couldn't fully comprehend, an alien queen whose existence defied all earthly logic. The recruitment process had been cryptic, almost surreal. A faceless corporation reached out to him in the dead of night via encrypted messages, offering more credits than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. All they asked was loyalty, discretion, and adaptability. Desperation had driven him to accept without much thought about what it truly entailed. Now, standing before the towering doors leading to her chamber, Elias felt the weight of his decision pressing down like gravity amplified tenfold. He adjusted the translator device strapped to his ear, its soft hum buzzing faintly beneath his skin. It was supposed to help bridge the gap between human language and whatever tongue, or sound, the Queen might use. But even this small piece of technology did little to calm his nerves. As the massive doors slid open with a sound akin to thunder softened by velvet, Elias took a hesitant step forward into darkness so profound it swallowed light whole. Inside, the chamber glowed with bioluminescent patterns dancing across organic walls that pulsed rhythmically, mimicking some kind of heartbeat. At the center lay the Queen herself, suspended within a web-like structure woven from shimmering threads that sparkled like starlight captured in silk. Her form was otherworldly, a blend of elegance and terrifying majesty. Long tendrils cascaded around her body, each one glowing softly with hues no human eye should be able to perceive. She turned toward him slowly, her gaze piercing yet strangely serene. Elias froze, unsure if he should bow or speak or simply remain silent. Before he could decide, a melodic series of tones filled the room, resonating deep within his chest. The translator crackled to life, rendering her words into broken English. "You are mine now." Her voice wasn't harsh but carried an authority that left no room for argument. Swallowing hard, Elias nodded stiffly. "I'm here to serve," he managed, though his voice trembled slightly. "Whatever you need." A ripple passed through her form, and the tendrils surrounding her shifted, curling outward as though beckoning him closer. Hesitant yet compelled, Elias stepped nearer until he stood just beyond arm's reach. Up close, the details of her anatomy became clearer. Scales that shimmered like liquid gold, eyes that glowed with inner fire, and delicate frills along her neck that quivered with every breath she took. She exuded an aura of raw power tempered by grace, leaving Elias both awestruck and uneasy. "Care for me," she said simply, her tone commanding yet oddly gentle. "And I will reward you." Reward? What did that mean? His mind raced with possibilities, none of which brought comfort. Yet there was something mesmerizing about her presence, something primal and magnetic that made resistance feel futile. Slowly, uncertainly, Elias began his duties, unaware of how deeply intertwined his fate would become with hers, or how dangerously pleasurable her demands might prove to be. Days blurred into weeks as Elias settled into his role as caretaker for the enigmatic Queen. Each morning, or what passed for morning aboard the ship, he entered her chamber to find her suspended in her radiant cocoon, awaiting his arrival. Their interactions followed a strange rhythm. She issued commands through the translator, her lilting tones carrying instructions ranging from mundane tasks like adjusting environmental controls to more abstract requests such as, "Bring me silence," or "Make the air sing." At first, these directives baffled him, but over time, Elias learned to interpret them not literally but emotionally. To bring her silence meant dimming the lights and muting external sounds. To make the air sing involved activating certain harmonics in the chamber's atmosphere that resonated with her pleasure. Yet it was during these moments of tending to her whims that Elias began noticing subtle shifts in her demeanor. There were occasions when her glowing eyes softened, her tendrils curling languidly around him as though testing boundaries. Once, while adjusting a panel near her resting place, he felt one of those tendrils brush lightly against his hand, an accidental touch, or so he thought. But then it lingered, tracing patterns along his skin that sent shivers coursing through his body. Startled, he pulled away, only to hear her emit a low, melodic hum that translated roughly as, "delightful." It wasn't long before Elias realized that serving the Queen wasn't solely about fulfilling practical needs. There was an unspoken intimacy woven into their dynamic, one that grew stronger with each passing day. She seemed to take particular pleasure in observing him work, her gaze following his every movement with an intensity that made him acutely aware of his own vulnerability. Sometimes, she would issue playful challenges, to balance objects precariously or mimic her movements with precision, that left him breathless and exhilarated. And always, there was the way her tendrils danced around him, teasing without ever crossing into outright invasion. One evening, as Elias adjusted the temperature settings to her specifications, she extended several of her glowing appendages toward him. This time, they didn't stop at his hands but wrapped gently around his arms, pulling him closer. His heart pounded wildly as he found himself inches from her luminous face, her breath warm and sweet against his cheek. Through the translator came a single word: "Stay." It wasn't a request, it was an order, delivered with a tenderness that disarmed him completely. For hours, or perhaps days, time lost meaning in her presence. He remained tethered to her side, ensnared not just physically but emotionally. Her touch conveyed sensations unlike anything he'd experienced before, waves of euphoria interspersed with fleeting jolts of electric arousal. When she finally released him, he stumbled back, dazed and overwhelmed. For the first time, fear mingled with fascination in his chest. No one had warned him about this aspect of his role. Not the recruiters, not the sparse manuals provided by the corporation. Pleasure, it seemed, was as much a part of her nature as dominance, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn deeper into something far beyond his understanding. As the weeks stretched into months, Elias found himself increasingly consumed by the Queen's world. The line between duty and devotion blurred, leaving him adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. Each day brought new revelations about her desires, her moods, her boundless capacity for both tenderness and control. He learned to anticipate her needs almost instinctively, his movements synchronized with hers in ways that felt both natural and unsettling. Yet despite the growing intimacy, there remained an unspoken barrier, a gulf of understanding that neither language nor shared experience could fully bridge. It was during one particularly quiet moment that Elias began to question the true nature of his role. She had requested that he sit beside her, a rare indulgence that left him both honored and uneasy. As he settled onto the soft, pulsating surface near her cocoon, he noticed something peculiar. The bioluminescent patterns adorning the walls flickered faintly, forming shapes that resembled constellations. They shifted and rearranged themselves with deliberate slowness, as though trying to convey a message. Intrigued, Elias leaned closer, squinting at the intricate designs. "What do they mean?" he asked aloud, pointing hesitantly at the glowing symbols. The Queen stirred, her tendrils brushing lightly against his shoulder in acknowledgement. Through the translator came a response that chilled him to his core: "They are memories of others who served." Others? The revelation hit him like a tidal wave, washing away any lingering illusions of uniqueness. He wasn't the first human, or perhaps not even the first creature, to hold this position. How many had come before him? What had become of them? The questions swirled in his mind, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Had they succumbed to her allure, losing themselves entirely in her embrace? Or had they resisted, only to meet some unknown fate? His unease deepened when he noticed another detail. The constellation pattern seemed incomplete, fragmented as though pieces were missing. Was it possible that the Queen's memory, or perhaps her very essence, was tied to those who served her? If so, what did that imply for his own future? Would he too become part of her tapestry, absorbed into her eternal narrative? Before he could dwell further on these thoughts, the Queen's attention shifted abruptly. One of her tendrils coiled tightly around his wrist, drawing him closer until their faces were mere inches apart. Her glowing eyes bore into his, searching for something he couldn't name. "You wonder too much," she murmured, her voice laced with both amusement and warning. "Wondering leads to doubt. Doubt weakens bonds." Her words struck a nerve, forcing Elias to confront the fragile balance he had been maintaining. On one hand, there was the undeniable magnetism of her presence, the intoxicating blend of power and affection that kept him tethered to her side. On the other, there was the creeping realization that he might be nothing more than a temporary fixture in her endless existence, a pawn in a game whose rules he barely understood. That night, as he lay awake in his quarters, the weight of his predicament pressed heavily upon him. He thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind, and wondered if it was already slipping beyond reach. Could he extricate himself from this arrangement, or had he already surrendered too much? The answers eluded him, leaving only restless uncertainty in their wake. Elias's internal turmoil reached a crescendo as he grappled with the implications of his servitude. Each day, the queen's demands grew more intricate, weaving a complex web of dependency that left him questioning his autonomy. Her touch, once a source of bewildering pleasure, now carried undertones of possession that unsettled him. He found himself oscillating between moments of blissful surrender and stark clarity about his diminishing freedom. The lines between caretaker and captive blurred, leaving Elias trapped in a paradox where escape seemed both imperative and impossible. His reflections often led him to ponder the ethical quandaries of his situation. Was he complicit in his own subjugation, or merely a victim of circumstances beyond his control? The corporation's silence on the specifics of his role haunted him, suggesting a calculated oversight designed to keep him pliable. Yet, amidst these musings, a rebellious spark ignited within Elias. He began to entertain notions of defiance, dreaming of ways to reclaim his agency without inciting the queen's formidable wrath. However, the complexity of his emotions towards the queen complicated his resolve. There were moments when her gaze softened, and her actions spoke of a genuine connection, making him question whether her intentions were purely manipulative. Could there be a symbiotic relationship here, where mutual benefits outweighed the costs of servitude? These thoughts tangled with his instincts for self-preservation, creating a mental labyrinth from which there seemed no clear exit. As Elias navigated this emotional quagmire, he realized that understanding the queen's true motives was crucial. Was she driven by loneliness, seeking companionship in the vastness of space, or was her behavior a calculated strategy to ensure unwavering loyalty? The ambiguity of her actions fueled his anxiety, pushing him to seek hidden meanings in every gesture and command. In his solitude, Elias started documenting his experiences, hoping to unravel the threads of manipulation and affection that bound him to the queen. This act of recording became a lifeline, anchoring him to his humanity and reminding him of the world outside her influence. Yet, each entry brought new questions, reflecting the evolving dynamics of his captivity. Was he documenting his decline, or charting a course towards liberation? The tension between survival and dignity tore at Elias, manifesting in sleepless nights and a growing sense of isolation. He yearned for a confidant, someone who could offer perspective or solace, but the secrecy of his mission precluded such comforts. Alone with his thoughts, Elias wrestled with the duality of his existence, servant and prisoner, captivated and repelled. Each sunrise aboard the ship illuminated his predicament anew, casting long shadows over his hopes for resolution. Elias's struggle intensified as he delved deeper into the psychological warfare waged silently within the confines of the alien vessel. The queen's methods were insidious, playing on his deepest fears and desires with a precision that suggested centuries of practice. He noticed patterns in her behavior, subtle manipulations that alternately rewarded and punished his compliance, keeping him perpetually off balance. One day, she might envelop him in a cocoon of warmth and pleasure, her tendrils caressing him with an almost maternal tenderness. The next, she would withdraw completely, leaving him bereft and desperate for her approval. This push-and-pull dynamic kept him teetering on the edge of devotion and despair, never allowing him to settle into a stable emotional state. Compounding his distress was the realization that the queen seemed to thrive on his uncertainty. Her glowing eyes would narrow with satisfaction whenever he hesitated or faltered, as though his confusion fed some primal need within her. It was as if she reveled in the chaos she wrought, finding amusement in his attempts to decipher her intentions. Elias began to see parallels between her tactics and those used by predators in nature, luring their prey into a false sense of security before striking. Yet, unlike a predator, the queen offered glimpses of kindness that clouded his judgment and made resistance all the more difficult. His mounting anxiety manifested physically. Sleep eluded him, and his appetite waned. Shadows under his eyes deepened, and his movements became sluggish, weighed down by the constant vigilance required to navigate her mercurial moods. During one particularly harrowing episode, Elias found himself unable to leave her chamber for nearly 2 days. She had summoned him repeatedly, issuing contradictory commands that left him scrambling to comply. By the time she finally dismissed him, exhaustion had rendered him nearly catatonic. Collapsing onto his bunk, he stared at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down his cheeks as he grappled with the futility of his efforts. Yet, even in his darkest moments, a stubborn ember of defiance refused to extinguish. He clung to the belief that understanding her motivations could provide a pathway to empowerment. Perhaps, he reasoned, the key lay not in resisting her outright but in learning to navigate her labyrinthine psyche. If he could anticipate her moves, predict her whims, maybe he could turn the tables and regain some semblance of control. This thought spurred him to observe her more closely, noting the nuances in her expressions and the cadence of her melodic speech. He began cataloging these observations in his journal, searching for patterns that might unlock her secrets. But the queen was no ordinary adversary. Just when Elias thought he had uncovered a pattern, she would shift unpredictably, throwing him back into turmoil. It was as though she sensed his scrutiny and deliberately altered her behavior to thwart his efforts. This constant recalibration left him mentally drained, his mind a battleground where hope clashed with despair. In quieter moments, he questioned whether his quest for understanding was itself a trap, a distraction designed to keep him ensnared while she tightened her grip. Amidst this psychological maelstrom, Elias also grappled with the moral implications of his role. Was he complicit in his own subjugation, or merely a pawn in her grand design? The corporation's deliberate vagueness about his duties gnawed at him, suggesting a sinister agenda that went beyond mere caretaking. Had they known all along what awaited him? Were they monitoring his descent into madness, collecting data on the effects of prolonged exposure to the Queen's influence? These suspicions fueled his paranoia, making it harder to distinguish reality from paranoia-induced delusion. Despite the overwhelming odds, Elias held onto a sliver of hope. Perhaps, he mused, his experiences could serve a greater purpose. If he survived this ordeal, he could expose the truth about the corporation and the Queen, sparing others from a similar fate. This vision of eventual redemption sustained him through the darkest hours, providing a flicker of light in an otherwise suffocating abyss. Yet, as each day bled into the next, the path to liberation seemed ever more obscured, buried beneath layers of manipulation and fear. Elias's resolve hardened as he recognized the necessity of taking bold action. The psychological toll of his servitude had reached a breaking point, and he knew that continuing on this path would only lead to his complete dissolution. He began crafting a plan, piecing together fragments of knowledge gleaned from his observations and the cryptic hints dropped by the Queen herself. Every interaction, every command she issued, became a potential clue in unraveling the mystery of her vulnerabilities. It was a perilous game, one that demanded utmost caution, for the slightest misstep could provoke her wrath. His first move was subtle yet significant. He started experimenting with minor acts of defiance, testing the boundaries of her tolerance. Initially, these were small gestures, delaying responses to her summons or executing tasks with deliberate imperfection. To his surprise, the Queen reacted not with anger but with intrigue, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied him with renewed interest. Encouraged by this reaction, Elias escalated his tactics, introducing elements of unpredictability into their routine. He varied the timing of his arrivals, altered the settings of her environment without explicit instruction, and occasionally feigned misunderstanding of her commands. Each deviation elicited a complex array of responses from the Queen, ranging from bemusement to frustration, providing Elias with invaluable insights into her psyche. Simultaneously, Elias intensified his efforts to understand the bioluminescent patterns that adorned the chamber walls. He spent hours deciphering their shifting forms, correlating them with the Queen's moods and behaviors. Gradually, a pattern emerged, one that suggested the symbols were not merely decorative but communicative. They appeared to reflect the Queen's emotional states, acting as a visual representation of her inner turmoil or contentment. Armed with this knowledge, Elias devised a daring strategy, manipulating the environmental controls to subtly alter the patterns, thereby influencing her mood. It was a risky gambit, but one he believed could tilt the balance of power in his favor. The culmination of his plan involved leveraging the Queen's apparent fascination with his newfound assertiveness. He orchestrated a series of calculated provocations, pushing her to reveal more about her past and the nature of her existence. During one such encounter, he boldly questioned her about the constellations of memories, challenging her to explain their significance. Her response was unexpected, a torrent of melodic tones that translated into a narrative of loss and longing, hinting at a vulnerability beneath her regal facade. This glimpse of her inner world emboldened Elias, reinforcing his belief that understanding her pain could be the key to unlocking his freedom. As he navigated this treacherous dance of manipulation and revelation, Elias remained acutely aware of the stakes. One wrong move could undo all his progress, plunging him back into the depths of despair. Yet, the prospect of liberation, however distant, fueled his determination. With each passing day, he edged closer to uncovering the truth, driven by a mix of desperation and hope. The journey was fraught with peril, but Elias knew that retreat was no longer an option. He had embarked on a path from which there was no turning back, propelled by the unyielding desire to reclaim his autonomy, or perish in the attempt. The culmination of Elias's rebellion came on a night when the chamber's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with an intensity he had never seen before. The queen seemed restless, her tendrils writhing in erratic rhythms as though caught in some unseen storm. Sensing an opportunity, Elias approached her cautiously, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. He adjusted the environmental controls one final time, subtly altering the atmospheric harmonics to align with the patterns she appeared to respond to most strongly. As the room shifted around them, the glowing constellations rearranged themselves into shapes that mirrored calm and serenity. For a moment, the queen stilled, her glowing eyes locking onto his with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something softer, almost vulnerable. It was then that Elias made his boldest move yet. Stepping closer, he spoke directly, bypassing the translator entirely. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor threatening to overtake it. "You don't have to keep me here." Her reaction was immediate but not what he expected. Instead of anger or retaliation, her tendrils reached out slowly, wrapping around him in a gentle embrace. Through the translator came a single phrase, "Explain." Elias took a deep breath, knowing this was his chance. He poured out everything. The confusion, the fear, the glimpses of affection that left him torn between loyalty and longing for freedom. He told her about the others who had served her, their fragmented memories etched into the walls, and how he feared becoming another ghost in her eternal narrative. His words were raw, unfiltered, driven by desperation and hope. When he finished, silence filled the chamber, heavy and suffocating. The queen regarded him with an expression he couldn't decipher, her glowing eyes flickering faintly. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she released him, her tendrils retreating as if withdrawing from a sacred space. Her melodic tones echoed through the translator once more, "Freedom is foreign to me." Her admission struck Elias like a thunderclap. For all her power and majesty, the queen was trapped too, in her own way, bound by instincts and millennia-old traditions. She thrived on connection, yes, but perhaps not domination. Perhaps her actions stemmed less from malice and more from a profound loneliness, a yearning for companionship that transcended species and understanding. In that moment, Elias realized the truth. Liberation wasn't just about escaping her grasp, it was about breaking the cycle altogether. If he fled now, leaving behind only resentment, nothing would change. Another caretaker would take his place, doomed to repeat the same dance of servitude and struggle. But if he stayed, if he chose to confront her not as a prisoner but as an equal, there might be a chance to rewrite the rules. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elias stepped forward again, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Then teach me," he said firmly. "Show me who you are, not just your power, but your pain, your joy, your dreams. Let me understand you fully, and maybe we can find a new path together." The queen hesitated, her tendrils quivering slightly as though weighing his proposal. Then, slowly, she extended one toward him, its glow softening until it resembled moonlight spilling across water. This time, when it touched his skin, there was no sense of possession, only a tentative offering, an invitation. What followed was unlike anything Elias could have imagined. Over days that stretched into weeks, the dynamic between them transformed. No longer confined to the roles of master and servant, they began exploring uncharted territory, navigating emotions and experiences neither had encountered before. The queen shared fragments of her history, stories of civilizations long extinguished and stars that burned brighter than any sun. In return, Elias offered glimpses of Earth, its beauty, its chaos, its endless capacity for reinvention. Together, they forged a bond that transcended language, biology, and expectation. Yet, even as their relationship evolved, shadows lingered at the edges of their newfound harmony. The corporation loomed large in Elias's mind, its motives still shrouded in mystery. And while the queen seemed willing to embrace change, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond their control were converging, threatening to unravel everything they had built. One evening, as they sat side by side amidst the pulsating glow of the chamber, Elias turned to her with a question that had haunted him since the beginning. "What happens next?" he asked softly. "For us? For everyone else?" The Queen's response was cryptic, delivered in tones that resonated with both promise and foreboding. "Paths diverge," she said. "Choices remain." It was then that Elias understood. Their journey was far from over. They stood at a crossroads, where decisions made in the coming days would shape not only their fates but potentially the future of countless others. Whether they emerged triumphant or broken depended on the choices they made, and whether they dared to trust each other completely. As the ship sailed silently through the void, carrying its unlikely pair toward an uncertain horizon, Elias felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer alone. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. Elias and the Queen worked together to dismantle the invisible chains that had bound them both, her instincts of control, his fears of entrapment. They began altering the ship's systems, erasing traces of the corporation's influence and creating safeguards against future interference. The constellation patterns on the walls shifted once more, this time forming new shapes. Constellations of hope, of unity, of choice. Yet, as they prepared for whatever lay beyond, tensions flared. The Queen grew restless, her tendrils sparking with an energy that hinted at internal conflict. "Freedom is dangerous," she admitted one night, her voice trembling. "What if I cannot be what you need?" Elias reached out, placing a hand over one of her glowing tendrils. "We'll figure it out together," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore." Their resolve was tested when the ship's sensors detected an incoming vessel. Corporate enforcers sent to retrieve Elias and ensure the Queen remained compliant. Panic surged within him, but the Queen's reaction was unexpected. With a melodic hum, she activated the ship's defenses, shielding them from intrusion. For the first time, she chose defiance over submission. As the enforcers retreated, their threats echoing into the void, Elias felt a profound shift. The Queen wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting him. Their bond had become something unbreakable, forged in mutual trust and sacrifice. In the aftermath, they made their final decision. Together, they would leave the ship behind, venturing into the unknown reaches of space where neither corporation nor tradition could dictate their lives. Using the ship's resources, they constructed a smaller craft, blending human ingenuity with alien technology. On the eve of their departure, Elias stood beside the Queen, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Her response came not through words but through a tendril wrapping gently around his wrist, a gesture of solidarity. As they boarded their new vessel, the old ship self-destructed behind them, severing all ties to their past. Their journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges neither could predict. But as they soared toward distant galaxies, Elias knew they carried something invaluable: freedom, hard-won and shared. The Queen's glow softened, reflecting peace rather than power, and Elias smiled, feeling the weight of fear lift from his shoulders. For the first time, they weren't bound by roles or expectations. They were simply two beings navigating the cosmos side by side. And in that simplicity lay infinite possibility.